All right. So thank you for everyone who is on the line today. We're glad to have you here, and I'm thrilled to have you for the second part of the New England region webinar series. So if you missed the first part where you had a conversation with Nicholas Hewitt talking about purpose first, I'll send that link and follow up to this webinar. I do want to let you know that this webinar is supported by the Barr Foundation, so we're grateful for their support. And just a couple of things here. I will be your kind of host and technical assistant. So if you're having any issues or concerns, please reach out to me via the chat function. Now, for those of you who may not know who I am, my name is Missy Fairfax, and I'm the strategy director for the New England states. I reside in Burlington, Vermont, so hello, neighbors. If you haven't reached out to me before, would like to connect, feel free to email me. My email address is right there. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brandon Protas, who is our AVP of Alliance Engagement, who's going to talk to us today about dual enrollment.
Great. Thank you so much, Missy, and it's good to see everyone here. In just a second, I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will get started. So as Missy said, my name is Brandon Protas. I'm the Assistant Vice President of Alliance Engagement here at CCA. And relevant to today's discussion, prior to coming to CCA almost 4 years ago, I actually ran a dual enrollment or concurrent enrollment program in Colorado. Actually led our college to become the first college or university in the state to earn the accreditation through NACEP, the National Alliance of Concurrent Enrollment Partnerships. And that I sat both on statewide as well as national NACEP advisory boards, and then also served as a reviewer. So all that's to say, very thoroughly steeped in dual and concurrent enrollment. So for our first part, we are going to do an interactive activity. So let's get started. Is everyone ready? Let's go. Okay, so if you could open up the chat, and if you could just type in, what number did you reach? I have a feeling there might be some confused looks. So let's do this one more time with directions. So this time we're going to redo that same activity, but I'm going to give you some directions. So I want you to find the number 1 mentally or point it out on your screen. Once you do that, find the number 2 and find the number 3 and so on, and see how high you can get. Let's go. So again, either in the chat or just to yourself, note which number you reached. Okay, I see some people throwing it in the chat. Awesome.
Yes, the chat was disabled. I apologize. I just disabled it. Sorry about that.
Okay, I thought we had some side people there. Thank you, Missy. Okay, so now we're starting to, we'll take this as the baseline. Let's do it one more time. We're going to do with directions, and this time we're going to add a framework. So again, you're going to find the number 1, then find the number 2, find the number 3, and so on. But this time you're going to see it's divided in quadrants, and you're going to find the number 1 on your top right, the number 2 in the bottom right, then over, we're going to go in a clockwise to the bottom left for the number 3 and up for the number 4. Let's go. Okay, again, we did this another round. If you could in the chat, now that it's enabled, if you can throw in what number you reached. And we're going to do it one last time. So same directions, same goals, same, so start with the number 1, number 2, see how high you can get, but we're going to do a slightly different framework. Let's go. Okay, and again, if in the chat, could you put what number you reached with our final time doing this? Okay, I'm seeing the numbers increase significantly. I'm seeing some 50s. You might say, well, why did we do this? We came for a webinar about dual enrollment. And so it's really not about the numbers, but it's about using this as an analogy for college. In the first example, students come to us and we may not even have a shared goal. We haven't even explained what the purpose of why students are at our door. Are they here to take some classes, to get a certificate, a degree, to transfer, to take dual enrollment, lifelong learning? The second time, we actually start building some shared language. But if you notice, the numbers were in all different places, and it was sort of a hodgepodge, because same thing in college, we have this hidden curriculum of how to navigate college that might make sense to us on the college, but doesn't make sense to students, particularly for first generation students who don't know how to speak higher ed, right? So if you think about, we have all these different nomenclatures of what's your program of study, what are you going to be majoring in, are you taking classes online or hybrid? It's an ecosystem that we've created that doesn't always make sense. So in the next round, we provided the framework, and we did this at the college where I used to work, because in the catalog, Monday, the shortcut is M, Tuesday is T, Wednesday is W, and of course, Thursday is R, which only exists in higher ed. So we actually produced a glossary of all of these acronyms we used and the translation. So we provided this framework, and we did a translation to help our students be able to navigate college. But the real question is, why didn't we move to that last one, where instead of having a confusing framework, where we needed to translate that framework, why not do it in a different way and change our systems and our structures? And so that's what we really want to think about. A little bit about Complete College America. I won't read the mission to you, but you will see highlighted we have one focus, which is to dramatically increase college completion rates while closing institutional performance gaps. And I said we have one mission, and it sounds like two things. That's because we see those as inextricably linked. And we use the term institutional performance gaps, and you see this referenced in our vision, because rather than saying equity gaps, which puts that on students, we put the responsibility on our institutions, because we know that when our institutions make changes, we actually make a difference in student outcomes. And that's our focus at CCA. If you don't know us already, we're known in a variety of ways. So we've put out lots of publications that have changed the national narrative around higher education. We tap into content experts and as well as fellows who are leaders in higher education for making the movements and the changes we want to see. Our theory of change combines policy, practice, as well as perspective of how we change those mindsets to be able to create those implementation change for strategies on the ground and policy that makes an unequivocal view of what we want to see differently. As Misi mentioned, we have alliance members throughout the country. We're actually up to 50, mainly states, but also consortia, which is how we work. And you see that happening here in New England. And then we partner with our alliance members with strategic initiatives and various projects, such as this Barr initiative. What you'll see here, and the reason I'm sharing our values is it'll frame the conversation we're going to have today, is we're focused on what works best for students. And we are very clear that we look at that through an equity lens for who's being served and who's not being served. We don't go off of anecdotes alone, but it's important that we have data that informs what we are doing. And we also are about not just doing pilot programs that impact a small number of students, but how do we go big? So we have the largest impact on the largest number of students. So implementation at scale, but it also means looking through a systems perspective, because we know that with many of our strategies, when you implement them, and dual enrollment is a great example, it doesn't happen in just one part of the college, but happens across the entire college. And being someone who ran a concurrent enrollment program for almost 10 years, I know that it impacts every part of the college. So if you're interested in knowing more, I know you're in front of a computer, you can sign up at completecollege.org. We don't spam you with a lot of materials, but you have access to our resources, our publications, and you can connect with us in lots of ways. So let's get started about dual enrollment. When you think about what I'm calling, and you hear in the field, dual enrollment 1.0, it was about how do we increase enrollment? Really thinks about what is dual enrollment? Where is it happening on the college campus, on the high school campus? Is it happening after school? How can we expand that? In fact, there was an article that just came out last week that said that dual enrollment programs are now outpacing, in terms of enrollments, outpacing advanced placement. That was something that we predicted was going to happen. We predicted it in conversations 5 and 10 plus years ago. We saw that exponential growth, and we also saw a lot of colleges and universities just trying to get students in. Well, what we saw next was what people talk about as dual enrollment 2.0, where you'll hear it of moving beyond the random acts of dual enrollment, which means how do you align your dual enrollment to make it meaningful, to connect to the college pathway so that students are having a similar experience and navigating and understanding college in similar ways. We'll talk about that a little bit more today. I would say that dual enrollment 3.0 is really looking at dual enrollment from an equity lens. So now looking at who is being served, who's not being served in intentional ways, or how are our dual enrollment programs mirroring the populations in our local communities. So it's not just privileging the students who are already privileged, but seeing as a way to disrupt the systems. What I would submit is when we put these three things together, the increased enrollment, the connecting to pathways, and focus on equity, we answer the question of why are we doing dual enrollment, and why does it matter both for our institutions, but also for our students and families. So let's go with another analogy, and I take this from Kathleen Martinez. She was an Assistant Secretary of Labor for Disability Employment under the Obama administration in 2009 to 2015. And she talked about that what matters is who we center. And she talked about this as someone who did labor and employment, who herself was blind, because she pointed out that in most buildings, there are lights there. She was talking about, let me frame this up. She was talking about when in disability law and providing reasonable accommodations, she would sometimes get the pushback. Why do I have to do extra for individuals with disabilities? Why do I have to buy special machinery? And she talked about that it matters who we center, because as a blind person, while those lights might help people who are sighted, for someone who's blind, that's not needed. So the institution or the organization is spending money on accommodations for lots of individuals. It depends on who we center. In a similar way, organizations spend a lot of money on chairs because we're centering people and individuals who don't come to work or come to schools in their own chair, because if we did, we wouldn't have to provide that. The point of this is not about the reasonable accommodations, but the lens that we use and who we center is going to dictate how we allocate resources and how we decide which actions to take. I'm located in Colorado, and in 2017, the master plan said that they want to move from a 55% state attainment rate for individuals with a higher education credential to 66. So on the one hand, that seems pretty doable. But again, it matters who we center to think about where are we going to provide those interventions and those actions to get to that 66%. Because when they disaggregated by race, what they found was Hispanic students were starting not at 55%, but a statewide attainment of 29%. For Black students, it was 39%, and Native American students mirrored Hispanic students at 29%. And they made it very explicit, but they weren't looking for a 66% attainment average. They wanted to ensure that all demographic groups were reaching that same statewide attainment goal. So when you do that, it's going to shape, again, how you allocate resources and how you drive that action. I think about John Powell. His work is out of Berkeley, and he talks about targeted universalism. And what he says with that is you have a universal goal, but you target those strategies to specific groups. So we just talked about with completion rates. He often talks about it when you think about curb cuts and sidewalks. The universal goal was mobility and transportation, being able to move around city streets. But that targeted strategy was specific for individuals who were in wheelchairs, or perhaps walking with cane, or other ways that would ease their ability to walk across streets. Now, what happens is, if you said a rising tide lift all boats, you wouldn't have come across that solution. But when you target to a specific population, you do. And that solution does help all students, or in this case, all people who are walking on sidewalks. But the only way that you'll get to that solution is by targeting to specific populations. So in higher education, I think we need to name it. I remember when I was on my campus and we did a special session and we named it the crisis in higher education specifically for Black male students, and what we were going to do to address it as we brought in families of Black high school students who were transitioning into college. The fact that we named it, it didn't just say, we're working for all students and you have a place here. The fact how we named it made a difference in how we spoke to those students and those families. So an example of targeted universalism, and this is appropriate now given the Supreme Court's actions or against affirmative action, you have to realize that in California, there was already state legislation banning the use of race for admissions. And so this is pre-pandemic, this was in 2020, and how the UC system admitted their most diverse class. And the reason why we're looking pre-pandemic is because we know that things changed a lot. So how did they do this and significantly increase the number of racially minoritized students? Well, they changed their tone of their marketing to think about how they attract more diverse applicants, racially diverse applicants. They built relationships and connected with counselors from specific high schools who often were underserved and left behind because they might not have been what they had in mind for selective admissions in the past. They also had different versions of excellence, and some of this is appropriate for what we see post-ruling of the Supreme Court, which is how do students maximize their opportunities afforded to them and seeing that as excellence? If you only look at things such as participation in elite sports or playing an instrument or some things that require significant amounts of investments of time and also money and opportunity cost, you're going to see one version of excellence that often privileges students who are already privileged, but you might not be seeing students who have to work full time and to support their families and have a different version of excellence. They did training to better contextualize the understanding of the educational environments for their admissions officers. How do you understand something that may be similar to your background and may be different depending on who you are for that admission officer? They cut down bureaucratic language, increased understandings around financial aid so that students would be attracted more. And then they did active targeting recruitment efforts for students of color to make them feel embraced as part of the community. And by the way, with the Supreme Court decision, you still can do recruiting activities. The White House actually just provided guidance on that today. And one last framing piece that I want to talk about was this article by Estella Ben-Simone and James Gray, where they flipped the script on first-generation students to first-generation practitioners. So often we think of first-generation students in a deficit way. They don't know how to navigate the systems of higher education. We put that on the students. When you flip that script, we say, is a first-generation practitioner someone who's learning, a faculty or staff member, not knowing how to navigate and educate specifically minoritized students and what that means and how we tailor our work towards them and center them the way I've been talking about through this whole way, using anti-racist practices to increase equitable outcomes. And when we do that, we want to think about what would those traits of a first-generation practitioner look like if we really centered our first-generation students, our students from racially minoritized populations, our students from underserved and under-resourced families and communities. So it's a different way of thinking about our roles within higher education. And what we're going to speak to now in a second will be how we do this with dual enrollment. Students come to higher education with tailwinds and with headwinds. The tailwinds and headwinds, if you notice in these images, those are things that the students are not controlling. If you're on a bicycle, you don't control the tailwinds that either propel you forward or the headwinds that sometimes push you back. And they can be flip sides of a coin. When we think about the impacts of poverty on students' ability to enter in and succeed in higher education, racism, housing insecurity, working while in school, multiple family obligations, all of these can be tailwinds despite students' goals for higher education, where headwinds might be parental level, educational levels. If you're coming from a family where you're coming from a two-parent family and both of your parents have advanced degrees, the social capital that may come with that, the external supports outside of school, being able to have a peer group that is also attending college, that's paving the way. And so when you're even thinking about college, of normalizing that. The thing is, we can build structures in to counteract those, at least to help counteract those headwinds. So what you see here are some pictures of Denise Muller-Kornick. And what I love this is she broke the paced bicycle land speed record. She went almost 184 miles per hour, it's 183.932. So I'm not making that up, almost 184 miles per hour on a bicycle. But if you look at what she had to counter those headwinds, you'll see that she has this specialty car with a windshield in front of her to counteract those headwinds. If you notice in several of the pictures, it's not just her. She has a whole team of people, whether it's holding the bicycle because she can't even stand on it. You can't see it in the picture, but there's actually a hook that holds onto the bicycle that will release once she's at a certain speed because of the gearing on her bicycle. She can't just start by riding. There's sponsors who are supporting her throughout the way. If you look at the bicycle itself, if you know anything about bicycles, that bicycle looks a little different. It's spread out really long. It has double forms of gearing. There's all of these things that help support her that when we think about in higher education, we can recreate. We can recreate that team effect of people cheering you on and supporting you and there to help you achieve your goal. The sponsors, whether that's financial or through student supports, the leveraging through the specialized gearing to be able to leverage best practices designed for students that look like you and come from backgrounds like you. There are ways we can do that. Sometimes people will say, is that cheating? And I would say, no. In her case, her goal was speed, and in this case, to break the speed record on a bicycle. And that's measured by two things, distance and time. I would submit that our work with students is success, and I would measure that by completion and equity. So how are we dramatically increasing the college completion rates at 2 years, at 4 years with credentials of value? And how are we doing this in an equitable way? So we're looking at which students are being served and which students are not being served from an equity lens. So yes, looking at racial equity, as well as equity across rural versus urban students, other ways where we see differences. And just as we saw with that example with Diane, we can make a difference when we take a team approach. So Complete College America has designed 4 pillars of student success strategies: purpose, structure, momentum, and support. And within that, there's 18 different student success strategies. You will see that dual enrollment is one of those. It's in the momentum pillar, which is that 3rd pillar in orange. I'm not going to focus on all 18 of those. That would be a different webinar. But what I do want to do is I want to focus on a handful of these and talk about these specifically through the lens of dual enrollment. Because I think what we need to do is make sure that we're connecting dual enrollment strategies with the student success strategies for college as a whole. So these are the ones that I've selected for us to talk about. The first one, multiple measures, and let me be clear, we're talking about multiple measures for placement into college readiness standards. When we say college readiness, I want to be clear, it's the college or the university, it's the institution who is making that determination, what is considered college ready or not, and then assigning students to either remedial classes or college level classes. It's not students who select that, it's determinations that colleges make. Very often, I know the college where I worked, we relied on the AccuPlacer. You see colleges that rely on SAT or ACT, even though they were not normed in that way. And the question is, are we using those measures, those high stakes measures, to sort students into who's college ready and who's not? Or are we using those to design support? So moving from sorting to supporting students. And one of the things that we know is we often do things the way that we've always done it. Why do we use the AccuPlacer? I don't know, when I got to the college where I worked, that's what they had always done. So that's what I told the high schools where we worked. As students had to meet certain college readiness standards before they could take dual enrollment. What we know from the literature and the research is actually that's a really bad way of determining if students will succeed in their college level courses. When you look at the correlations, AccuPlacer actually does a bad job. We know that high school GPA, for example, does a much better way. And CCA actually released a report not too long ago looking at authentic measures of high school performance for students to be able to show their readiness. And while this is often done for high school graduates, this goes into dual enrollment. So when I was running a dual enrollment program, we were looking at those performance assessments that I mentioned before. So authentic work that students were already doing in their high school math and high school English courses, not dual enrollment ones, high school ones, that we could then connect to say, what would be acceptable through vertical alignment. So we got our high school curriculum specialists together for math and English, together with our department chairs at the college, to be able to talk through what does that look like, of what would that expectation be through actual assessment. So on the one hand, it could be when a student graduated, they could submit that, but during dual enrollment, that could be done as well. We also did vertical alignment to find out, where did the high school curriculum end and where did the college curriculum begin? Which meant if a student entered a college level course without any need for remediation, what skills would they have to do? So we didn't just do it off of a course title. We actually spent a year looking at course assessments, looking at curriculum, looking at demonstrations of learning to figure out where that handoff was. We found a place where that worked in the high school curriculum. And it just so happened it was for us, I think you need to do that vertical alignment, but it was junior level high school, and it was Algebra 2, which often is taken in the junior year. So we said that students with a certain high school GPA and a grade in that class could then take that college level course directly after that, meeting certain measures, rather than having to show their levels on an AccuPlace or an ACT. What that did is it expanded who we served. We did this with equity in mind because we served a district that was primarily students of color and first-generation students. Now we paired that with the next one, which is co-requisite support. You heard me talk about college level versus remediation. One of the things that CCA knows and is a strong advocate for is the elimination of traditional prerequisite remediation, meaning if you're deemed not college ready, that you would have to take 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of remedial courses. The research shows that when students enter remediation, they rarely get out of remediation. So for every 10 students that start, maybe 1 out of 10, 10 out of 100 get to and through that college level course. So we're building barriers for students who say that they want to go into college. Well, typically that's done at the college level, not through dual enrollment. It's after students leave high school. What we started to say was, if we are doing best practices for college students, and in dual enrollment, so high school students taking college level courses, regardless of whether that course is taught at the high school, at the college campus, whether it's a college instructor or a college instructor on the college campus, or one who travels to the high school campus, or the high school teacher who's qualified as the college instructor, we treat dual enrollment students as college students. It's not college students in quotes, it's you're taking the college curriculum, you're following a college course. So if we're offering co-requisite support on the college campus, we're going to do it in dual enrollment as well. And so co-requisite is, as opposed to those levels of remediation, students go directly into that college-bearing gateway English or math course. And in that same semester, they take an additional course for co-requisite support that uses just-in-time teaching, activated learning, culturally relevant instruction, and it has much better, significantly better success rates than traditional prerequisite remediation. So you heard me reference the multiple measures. We said students had to have a certain high school GPA and a certain grade in key classes that prepared students for college, because we did not want to supplant the high school curriculum. We wanted students to go through the high school curriculum and then do that handoff. Well, students could have gone through that high school curriculum, but maybe didn't have the GPA or did poorly in that high school course. Well, that's where co-requisite support comes in. They could still take that college level course through dual enrollment, but now linked together with a co-requisite support class through dual enrollment. So students still had access, and we found ways that all students who were entering their senior year, if they followed that traditional high school curriculum, would be ready to take their first college level class on its own as a standalone class, or through co-requisite support, now opening up access to all students. Let me shift to the next one, 15 to finish. This is a campaign. It's often tied together with Stay on Track through Complete College America. 15 to finish is to make sure that students graduate on time for the time that they want. So 4 years for a baccalaureate degree, 2 years for a community college degree. What happens is frequently students will say, oh yeah, I'm going full time because full time for financial aid is 12 credits. and not realizing that if you do the math and take 12 credits each semester, you'll never make it to finish in 4 for your baccalaureate degree, as an example. So it's a combination of a communications campaign, but it's also a structural campaign because we talk about things like year-round course taking, so summer classes, winterums, things like that, to make it so students can take their classes and graduate on time. Stay on Track is a different version of this for part-time students, particularly when they're at a commuter campus, very often community colleges, while working part or full-time. Well, how does dual enrollment work with 15 to finish? We know that the reality of many of our students, particularly coming from under-resourced communities and families, is that you have to work to help support your family while you're in college and while you're in high school. And if we want to say you are going to come and you have the most success by coming full-time, on-time, 15 credits per semester, that may be a form of cultural imperialism of saying you're going to do college our way. So think back to the numbers game. You have to do it in the convoluted way our numbers are, rather than saying, how do we change our structures to make it work for individual students? Well, when I said 15 to finish, that's just one nomenclature. There's different terms to use it. Finish in 4, finish on time. But the point is graduating in the amount of time that it would normally take to finish a 2 or 4 year degree. Those plans, 15 to finish, are built off of someone who does not come in already with credit. But if you build those pathways out through dual enrollment, now a student who's coming in with 6, 9, 12, 15 credits, and who's coming onto a campus where there's summer options, might actually be able to go to school what might normally be seen as part-time status, while they're working full-time, and still finish a community college degree in 2 years, a baccalaureate degree in 4 years. And so that can be built into that plan from the get-go rather than as an afterthought. So that proactive advising fits right in with that, because how would students know about that? I come from actually both a K-12 background as well as a college background. And so I believe strongly in the professionalism of high school counselors, and there are national and statewide associations that discuss that, as well as college advisors. And they have distinct roles. And while there's overlap, those are distinct. And so while a high school counselor may talk about college readiness, outside of perhaps a P-TECH or an early college with shared mission, that's different than what a college advisor is talking about, and talking about how to navigate college and some of the other pieces that we're going to talk about in just a second. If we're going to treat college dual enrollment students as college students, not college students in quotes and not college students light, then they need to have and they deserve that same kind of college proactive advising. In fact, in NASEP, when they redid their standards, their quality standards for accreditation in 2017, they included advising, because they recognized that part of dual enrollment is not just the courses you take, but it's the understanding that the college courses have a larger part of your trajectory. So part of that is when we go down to career exploration. When you think about it, in high school, there's one way of finishing, and that's you get a high school diploma. In college, there are literally hundreds of ways to exit successfully. There's certificates, there's at 2-year colleges, there's associate's degrees, there's transfer pathways, and then within that, there's majors, there's programs of studies, there's stackable credentials. Part of that is tied to what your interest is as a student. I will often hear, oh, but our dual enrollment students don't know what they want to do yet. That's where career exploration comes in. Is how do you make that part of either dual enrollment classes or some of the work prior to students entering dual enrollment? It doesn't mean that because they choose an area that they will stick with that forever, but there's even some of that understanding, that navigational capital of what it means to connect college to your academic pursuits. There's all kinds of courses and programs of study in college that don't exist in high school, and that if all you're aware of is what you've seen on TV, you're going to become a doctor or a lawyer or maybe a forensic psychologist or a criminologist because you've seen that on TV, but there's a lot more that students can do, but you need to be exposed to that in deep and meaningful ways, and that can be connected with CTE pathways that are started in high school. When we move to the next one, meta majors, this moves from, you don't have to choose necessarily that exact program of study, but understanding that for students, and particularly dual enrollment students who are learning about college for the first time, that there are specific pathways you can go on. So a meta major focused around helping professions. A student may not know if they want to do psychology, sociology, social work, human services. They may not even know the difference of those, but it's more likely that they're going to be drawn to something within that and change within those than they're going to say, I don't know if I want to be a chemistry major or maybe a fine arts major across different pathways. So getting students on the right meta major and building up those pathways within high schools. So dual enrollment isn't just, again, that random active dual enrollment. You happen to take an English course because you have an English teacher on your campus. You happen to teach a business course, but rather designing those pathways can start. And I did this when I ran a dual enrollment program, where the first 3 or 4 courses fit with a specific program study or meta major. So students don't just raise their hand and say, I want to do college in dual enrollment. I want to do dual enrollment around graphic design. I want to do dual enrollment around this program around business. Now that has meaning and you can start to build those credentials. And even related to career exploration, if a student switches gears, that happens in life with adult students as well, not just dual enrollment students. But there's a difference in saying, I know that when I was taking that Business 101 course, that was part of this larger pathway, and that when I switched to accounting, that business course may still count towards the program of study, but now it's an elective, but it's part of a pathway, and having that understanding. Or when I take this math course or this English course, that's going to fit in any of my programs, whether it's the physics program or whether it's a pre-law program, but having an understanding that you're following a pathway in college, because that's very different than the way that courses are assigned in high school. And with meta majors, we've seen on colleges, math pathways expanding, where it used to be that college algebra was the default for all students. And many students didn't graduate because they struggled with algebra, and that was never required for their program of study, or maybe it was, but it was really never in terms of the course catalog, but was never really relevant to their program of study or their career. So what we've seen now is different math pathways at colleges. So math for liberal arts, statistics pathways, college algebra for STEM students who are going to calculus. You sometimes see other ones in terms of math for nursing professions, allied health professions. You sometimes see business math. The point is the math course that is relevant, not more difficult or more easy, but the most relevant to what your program of study is, connected to your meta major based off career exploration. I was on a forum once about, well, how do we do this in high school? Because we're starting to see math pathways in high school. And what I think is best is, rather than just trying to align high school to college expectations, is if you are taking that college gateway entry level math class while you're in high school, then that math pathway follows it. With the right advising, if you're taking statistics, if you're taking math for liberal arts or college algebra or STEM tracked math, because that's the field you're going into, you understand what that pathway is through that proactive advising and understanding that it splits off in different ways. And it's not higher or lower, that's often seen in high school, but different, distinct, rigorous pathways. And finally, what I referenced a little bit in 15 to finish is not just that the credits count towards your overall program of study or degree, but that colleges are building academic maps that actually outline which courses should you take if you are in a specific meta major or program of study. As I mentioned, I built those out when I was running a dual enrollment program for different high schools. We said, we want to do dual enrollment for you, but we want to make sure that the courses at your high school are aligned to a specific program of study. So now you can hire your high school teachers who can teach concurrent enrollment within specific areas. But to do that, we need to map out which courses are appropriate at the high school campus. Which ones do we want to introduce students to the college campus? And that was done vertically, meaning it was a college department chair, it was the concurrent enrollment program, both from the college, together with that high school principal or counselor or person in charge. So it was a joint effort. And that goes to what I want to talk about here is very often, I realize these are just icons, but we're showing high school on the left and college on the right. These are separated by a wall. And there's a lot of misunderstanding between high school and college. Sometimes there's blame of one system to the other. And although we have similar aims, it can be nuanced in different ways. And what I would submit is it should look, as opposed to a line separating us, it should be connected. And I have seen this where college and high school programs say, when our high school staff and our college staff are out in the community talking about dual enrollment, people don't know which is from the high school and which is from the college because we are so aligned in our messaging. So I want to come up with three series of action steps, thinking about connecting these dots around the 1.0, the 2.0, and the 3.0 of dual enrollment. So yes, increasing our numbers, making it meaningful college to our college programming, and also having equity in mind. So when we think about communications of what are the key ways that we are communicating, again, thinking about who are the students and families we are centering and not on the periphery, to tell them you belong here. This college is our first choice for you, and here's why: we have small classes. This is a great place for undocumented students. We know your name. You're going to get the individual attention that you want. You've started the classes while you're in high school, now finish them when you graduate. There's a lot of messaging. Hold focus groups. We actually did this because we worked with a large undocumented population, and we want to know what are ways that we can speak to undocumented students that will hit them in the right way without stigmatizing them. What's the correct language that will be student identified? So think about the support programs. When you come to this college while you're in dual enrollment afterwards, we have your back, and here's how we do that. Let's demystify where college for many families can be that scary thing over there. Let's invite them in. We need to partner with those individuals and groups to get those messages out to the right people in the right way. So sometimes that's through the high school, sometimes it's through the college, sometimes it's through community groups of breaking down those barriers. We know the silos that happen on and across college campuses and between colleges and high schools, particularly in dual enrollment programs. So how do we ensure that we're meeting on regular bases to be able to hear from both perspectives to build programs that work? And those messages that go both to students but also internally matter. How are we ensuring that our instructors, our faculty, full-time, adjunct, our advisors on our college campus are celebrating and championing dual enrollment? How do they know the pass rates? At least on my program, and we see this across the board, dual enrollment students typically outperform the average pass rate for the college as a whole. So how are we making champions of our folks on our college campuses, but similarly at the high school, so that they're championing the connections to our individual colleges? When we think about student recruitment, and this is either before or after the Supreme Court decision, let's take a targeted universalist approach. Let's define what our goal is. You can't say you want to increase equity unless you've defined what it is. One way to start is, what does your local community look like demographically? What does that high school look like demographically? That can be and should be across race. It should be across gender, because we're seeing differentiations of who's attending and persisting in higher education based off of gender. It can be on income, family income. Often we see that with free and reduced price meal designations, so proxies for that in high schools. But understanding who's being served and who's not being served overall, and then breaking that down demographically, and then looking at how is that being done through your dual enrollment program. Does your dual enrollment program mirror your population as a whole, or is it serving a specific subpopulation that's already being privileged? And if so, then what are the structures that encourage that, whether intentionally designed that way or not? When we talked about the AccuPlacer for college readiness, when I first started, you had to take the AccuPlacer just to take a concurrent enrollment course. I got pushback, rightfully so, from a principal that said, what does that have to do with every course that they have to take? You're using that as a proxy for, quote, smart students. And when I went back to our department chairs, I found that was true. Well, we want students who are ready. Okay, if you're taking a English course or a math course that's college level, maybe there's some readiness with that. If you're taking an intro computer course, how does that performance on an AccuPlacer relate to that specific course? If you're doing engineering design, how does it relate to that specific course? So we had systems that put up artificial barriers to students that we had to look at. So really strategize that from the perspective of, I want to be a first generation practitioner. I want to center the students and think about, if we built our college and our dual enrollment program specifically for the populations who are not currently being represented as they should in our numbers, what would that college look like? Think about the language, those processes, even the programming of those students. How do you invite students in when college may or may not be a safe place for them? Meaning a place that they've already been invited and feel that they have a space into. So looking at social and cultural capital, not as a negative in terms of a deficiency, but the responsibility of the college. When we think of TRIO programs, that's exactly what TRIO programs do. We find ways of being able to do that. We can build stackable certificates, right? Start this, you'll complete a certificate while you're in high school. You're going to build upon that because now you actually have some work credentials. So if you need to work, you're going to start to get a job within your field after you graduate from high school, so you can continue this program while you're at our college. We know that family is important for certain populations. So how are you doing in Dia de las Familias? And you're inviting the entire family to celebrate dual enrollment. As I mentioned, we did a program and we talked about the crisis for Black male students on our college campus. When we talked about it that way to our Black families, boy, did that resonate differently than just saying we're trying to bring about diversity onto our campuses. We talked about the reasons and what we were doing to change that. How do you create that sense of belonging around that socialization and activities at orientation? It's very often that orientation programs, if you look at who's actually participating and who's on the periphery, intentional or not, we have to disrupt that. So that comes to personalizing messages, not just come to our college as a whole. You've done dual enrollment. Here's why you should do dual enrollment. We're talking to you, making it so that there's a direct connection. This is the college for you. This is your first place to look. And that means, yes, operating outside the silos, so concurrent or dual enrollment offices and recruitment offices are working lockstep. How are you developing, as an example, scholarships specifically for concurrent enrollment students? So before they enter into concurrent enrollment, you can tell an 8th grade student and their family, come to this high school. Here's the programming we have for you for dual enrollment, not just college, but you can do college in these specific areas. If you're interested in nursing pathways, we have your back. You can do that here. If you're interested in engineering graphics, we have that program. Graphic design, we have that. We have stackable credentials, and we have scholarships specifically for students to complete what they finished in concurrent enrollment. That sends a different kind of recruitment message. And building around college success. The things that we've talked about is integrating concurrent enrollment together with your college or university. So some of the CCA strategies is really interrogating hard why you do placement and where it fits and what, not prerequisite remediation, but prerequisites for courses. How do you make those as low as they possibly can be, but necessary and meaningful so that they're not artificial barriers? How do you do that vertical alignment that I discussed to make sure you have that proper and intentional handoff between high school and college in English and math, as well as other areas, by looking at the actual artifacts of curriculum? How do you think of different ways of inviting students in through performance assessments? Beyond that, what's the communication between high schools and colleges? What kind of leadership councils are you bringing together? Not just on the logistics, that can be a piece of it, but to say, what are the difficult questions that we haven't been considering? What are the barriers that we need to explode and think of differently? How do you ensure that all students have that clear entry way into college? So thinking about math pathways in college, how do we align this to math pathways in high school? So there's understanding versus myth creation of what is considered rigorous. I talked about building those academic maps so students are seeing what that looks like while they're in high school. So rather than building off of deficits or reinforcing deficits, our students don't know how to do college. It is our responsibility to build those navigational tools, at the very least in our numbers game, to tell the secret unwritten curriculum, but hopefully to be able to redesign it in different ways. So when we look at blurring what it means to be in high school and starting college in high school, that looks very different, whether it's through CTE pathways or through general studies, transferable pathways, that there's a clear line, and we did this where I worked, from high school to a 2-year program onto a 4-year that even went into master's programs, clear lines of trajectories. And that training that is part of NACEP quality standards for accreditation requires professional development. That's often seen as, how do you do the professional development for content areas from the college to the high school? But what we learned is our college faculty have master's or advanced degrees in the content area. Our high school teachers actually have a lot more pedagogy training in their master's programs. So we did reciprocal training. So our colleges definitely did content instruction for high school teachers around the curriculum and standards, academic standards. But our college instructors and faculty gained so much of pedagogical training from our high school teachers. And then you have a mutual respect and you start to break down that hierarchy as well. In terms of student activities across high school and college, those can be co-curriculars in traditional ways, but those can be ways that are specifically built for our dual enrollment students to come up with real life experience. So if you're doing healthcare certificates, what are ways that you can actually have experiences within the field? We know that it's a lot more meaningful. What are ways that you can do summer success academies while students are in high school, still getting dual enrollment credit, or as they're graduating or entering into fifth-year programs, but being intentional about not just what that programming is, but who it is designed for at the center of it and how it can have the biggest impact. So I am going to pause there. I want to share my contact information. I'm welcome to talk with you after this webinar is done if you have other questions. What I want to point out more than anything is the why of dual enrollment. And what we've talked about is combining the 1.0, the 2.0, and that 3.0. So not just increasing numbers for numbers' sake. That's certainly a piece of it, and we've seen vast increases in that. That 2.0 is making meaningful college, so connecting high school and college through dual enrollment to college pathways when we think about guided pathways and some of the programs that we develop. And 3.0 is centering equity and the students who are historically underserved at our college campus to make sure that we are centering them and to make a difference for dual enrollment students as part of that disruption to increase college completion for all students with equity in mind. So with that, I'm going to pause there. I will turn it back to Misi, and I have left time if there's any questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Brandon. And we do have time for questions. So if folks have questions, put them in the chat. I'm happy to unmute you or put them in the Q&A.
I will also say, while we're seeing if there's any questions, we want to make sure that, and maybe you're going to talk about this, that people are aware of our annual convening. So Complete College America will be hosting our annual convening December 10th through 12th. That's going to be happening in Las Vegas. We have special incentive pricing for teams of 4 or more to be able to attend. So we would love to see you in person and not just through a video screen, and you see it here on the screen here.
Yeah, so if you haven't already, feel free to reach out. I know a number of folks already on the line. My Maine and Vermont cohorts have signed up already. So we'd love to see you all there. And if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. Now, Brandon, you touched on this, but I just wanted to bring this to the forefront. You mentioned about the ideal of who the ideal student is for a dual enrollment program. You mentioned some action steps, but what is a way to kind of break down that barrier for folks who don't necessarily have those partnerships or looking to build those partnerships in terms of just opening it up to more students and building more equity into that selection
That's a great
process?
question. And I'm going to turn philosophical for a second. Dual enrollment often started when you look back at it in its early days. And in some states, there was actual policy around exclusionary practices around dual enrollment, that it really was seen as this is just for the brightest students, for the honor students, and was supposed to be seen as a form of advancement for those students. So I think philosophically, there's a big change between that and saying the very students who we want to see served in dual enrollment are students who may not otherwise see themselves in college. And by building these programs in high school and students having that first success, that they realize, wow, I can do college. I have done college. As I said, our pass rates for our dual enrollment students, by far, they outperformed the traditional students on our college campus, and we ran those every year. I shared that directly with students when we were recruiting, but I also shared that every semester with our faculty, with our department chairs, with our deans, and with our leadership, because it's important to change that switch of who are we doing dual enrollment for and how are we building these practices? Because I think there's a lot of assumptions that goes in to what a high school student is, and then even within that, which high school students, and using coded language. And so I think we need to start really at that philosophical foundation if we're going to then build that up for how we're going to recruit those students, which high schools we're going to recruit at, rather than again, coded language of which are good high schools and which are bad high schools, which I think is racially coded and racist, but to be able to break that down and then align to our mission. I see a question in the chat. I love the idea of using different metrics to determine college success readiness. Are you finding most colleges are willing to use these different measurements? It's interesting. So this conversation changed post-pandemic or during the pandemic. I will say that very often the way that multiple measures has been seen is it's often seen in terms of how students get into selective colleges. And so for admissions, I'm talking in terms of placement. As a result of the pandemic and people not being able to take the standardized tests in ways, we saw lots of colleges that have abandoned it temporarily, and then many that have abandoned those tests permanently. And so we've seen huge success. If you want, I'm happy to talk to you later. I can share some of the data that shows that high school GPA is a much better predictor of college success than AccuPlacer. So some of it is changing those perspectives by sharing that relevant research and that data. And so we have seen a lot do that. In terms of the performance assessment, there are some colleges that are doing that. That tends to take a little bit more time and is a little bit more rigorous to make that determination when you're looking at a holistic review for placement versus just a number. But the short answer is yes, but we're seeing lots of colleges move beyond just single measures for placement.
All right, well, it looks like we're not going to get any more questions. So Brandon, I just want to thank you so much for your time and expertise and having this webinar. And I want to thank the individuals who have were on the line with us to the very end. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
This will be shared with you. And for those who weren't able to attend, you will be able to access the link. So if you can reference this later. Thank you all for joining and have a wonderful rest of your day, rest of your week.